We want to jump right into the discussion that we were having last time where we left off. Actually, let me take a moment and just review a couple of the major points that I was trying to make in the last class session. Everybody ready?
Thank you.
At the same time.
We were talking last time about these two principal functions of Congress, the representation function and the lawmaking function. And I said that to a very significant extent, these two most important functions of Congress are inherently at odds with one another. That to the extent that Congress does one well, it makes it more difficult for Congress to do the other. But that the scholars, the people who study the Congress, people like Richard Fenno and Randall Ripley and others who have written volumes, many books on the United States Congress, tell us that we ought to think about Congress most of the time in sort of its natural state or its ordinary state as being in a fragmented condition. So that this legislative function that implies decision-making in a unified, integrated process is really pretty rare. Now, that's really not the common way that the common condition that we find in Congress. And so it probably shouldn't surprise us that Americans express frustration at their national legislature, that many people have such a low opinion of Congress. But I think what people are sensing is that the difficulties of the legislative process and the fact that Congress most of the time is not operating in this unified, integrated fashion. In fact, most of the time it's the representation function that is being maximized. The individual representatives, the 435 members of the House, the 100 members of the senators, the individual members of the institution are mainly concerned about representing the interests of their constituents. This idea of a constituency focus that I think was the term that we used last time. I don't think I mentioned this to you in the last class meeting, but it just popped into my head, so I'll mention it to you now. For many years, I'm not sure if they still use this terminology in Washington, but certainly people who were in Congress and who write about Congress and who study Congress and so on used to use this term to refer to the House of Representatives and its constituency focus. They would talk about the House, they called it the Tuesday-Thursday Club. And that suggested that members of Congress typically are only in Washington and in the House of Representatives, in the chamber, from Tuesday to Thursday, because Thursday evening they typically hop on a plane and fly back to their home districts and stay for the weekend to press the flesh with the constituents, to meet constituents, to hear the concerns that their constituents have, and then generally will continue that through the following Monday, only to return either late Monday evening or early Tuesday morning. And so, for example, the leaders in the House used to complain that it was very difficult to conduct any legislative business on Mondays or Fridays. It's kind of like in college classes where many students take off on Friday and others, maybe also take off on Monday. And so if you're going to get any real work done, you have to get it done in that Wednesday class session, right? Well, maybe it's not exactly like that. But, they would often complain that there weren't enough members in the House chamber on Mondays or Fridays to even get a quorum, right, in order to take a vote. So any legislative business that needed to be done had to be done in Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday sessions of Congress. So, that's a reflection of the fact that the individual members of the House have this really keen sense of or perception that they have to keep in close contact with the folks back home. They have to, make sure that they are adequately representing the interests of their constituents by being actually in the district and not in Washington. Okay, and senators had their version of that. I mean, the longer terms of members of the Senate made it a little bit more convenient for senators, I guess, in the sense that they didn't have to go home every weekend. but they had a practice for many years in the Senate where they would only have legislative sessions for 3 weeks out of the month, and 1 week of the month the senators would go back to their home states and meet with the constituents and so on. So that is just a little bit of evidence there that for the individual members of the House, for the individual members of the Senate, their primary concern is the representation function. And as I said last time, to the extent that they are spending their time and energy trying to enhance the representation function, that oftentimes works against the legislative function of Congress.